Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Don't forget to subscribe and check out my other socials for more. Enjoy. Frank hunched over a control panel, his wild hair sticking up in all directions as he made final adjustments. "Are you sure about this, Gary?" Frank asked, glancing at his roommate who stood nearby, shifting nervously from foot to foot. Gary ran a hand through his neatly combed brown hair, his khakis and button-down shirt, a stark contrast to Frank's disheveled appearance. "I mean, you've already used it successfully, right? On your sister and yourself?" Frank nodded, a manic gleam in his eyes. "Oh yes, it worked beautifully. My sister's clone is indistinguishable from the original, and my brief stint as a woman was enlightening." He chuckled. "But this will be the first time we've attempted interdimensional travel. The risks are unpredictable." Gary swallowed hard but squared his shoulders. "I trust you, Frank, and the potential discoveries are worth it. Let's do this." Frank's grin widened as he punched in a series of commands. The chamber hummed to life, electricity crackling along its surface. "All right, step inside. Remember, focus on where you want to go. The machine will do the rest." Gary took a deep breath and stepped into the chamber. The door sealed shut with a hiss. Frank's fingers flew over the controls, and the hum intensified to a deafening roar. Bright light flooded the room, forcing Frank to shield his eyes. When the light faded and the noise died down, Frank rushed to the chamber. He flung open the door, heart pounding. The chamber was empty. Frank stumbled back, mind reeling. Had it worked? Was Gary in another dimension, or had something gone horribly wrong? Before he could spiral further into panic, the air in the room began to shimmer. A swirling vortex of energy appeared, growing larger by the second. Frank watched in awe as a figure stepped through. It was Gary, sort of. The person who emerged from the portal was undeniably female, with long brown hair and curves that filled out the now ill-fitting khakis and button-down. But the facial features were unmistakably Gary's, feminized, but still recognizable. "Holy shit," Frank breathed. "Gary!" The woman blinked, looking down at herself in wonder. "Frank, what happened?" Frank's scientific curiosity overtook his shock. He circled Gary, taking in every detail. "Fascinating. It seems the interdimensional travel triggered a gender transformation. How do you feel?" Gary ran hands over the new body, a mix of emotions playing across the delicate features. I don't know. It's strange, but not unpleasant. Everything feels different, but also right somehow?" Frank nodded eagerly. "That tracks with my own experience. The machine seems to tap into some underlying potential or alternate version of ourselves. Did you see anything of the other dimension?" Gary's brow furrowed in concentration. "It's all a blur. I remember a sensation of falling, then floating. Flashes of landscapes, cities, people, but nothing concrete." Frank mused, already scribbling notes. "We'll need to refine the targeting. But this is an incredible start. Are you up for more tests?" Gary hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, I think so. This is pretty amazing, actually." A smile spread across the feminine features. "I kind of want to explore this more." Frank clapped his hands together. "Excellent. Let me adjust a few parameters and we'll try again. This time, let's see if we can maintain your new form while sending you to a specific alternate Earth." As Frank tinkered with the machine, Gary explored the new body, marveling at the changes. The heightened sensitivity of the skin, the shift in balance and movement. It was disorienting, but exhilarating. "Okay, ready for round 2? Frank asked, practically bouncing with excitement. Gary nodded, stepping back into the chamber with only slight hesitation. The door sealed, and once again the room filled with light and noise. This time, when the chamber opened, Gary stumbled out, still female, but now dressed in a sleek, futuristic outfit of shimmering fabric. "It worked!" Frank crowed. "How was it? What did you see?" Gary's eyes were wide with wonder. "It was incredible, Frank. A whole world of towering crystal spires and flying vehicles. The technology was like nothing I've ever seen. And the people, they were so advanced, so enlightened." Frank scribbled furiously in his notebook. Excellent, excellent. Any negative effects? Disorientation? Nausea? Gary shook her head. Nothing major, just a slight dizziness that passed quickly. Perfect, Frank muttered. We need to document everything. Your physical changes, your experiences, the differences in the alternate Earth. This could revolutionize our understanding of reality itself. As the day wore on, Frank and Gary continued their experiments. Gary traveled to several more alternate dimensions, each trip bringing new wonders and insights. Sometimes the changes to Gary's body were subtle, slight alterations in hair or eye color. Other times the differences were more dramatic. Blue skin, extra limbs, even non-human forms. Through it all, Gary's enthusiasm grew. The fear and uncertainty of the first trip gave way to an insatiable curiosity. Each new form, each new world expanded Gary's understanding of what was possible. Frank, for his part, was in scientific heaven. He meticulously recorded every detail, his mind racing with the implications of their discoveries. The potential applications seemed endless: medicine, technology, philosophy, the very nature of existence itself. As night fell, they finally took a break. Gary, back in female human form, collapsed onto the bed, exhausted but exhilarated. Frank paced the room, still buzzing with energy. We need to tell someone about this, Gary said. The scientific community needs to know. Frank's expression darkened. No, not yet. We don't know who we can trust. Think about it. The power to reshape reality, to travel between dimensions. Every government, every corporation would want to control it. Gary frowned. But isn't that the point of scientific discovery? To share knowledge, to benefit humanity? Frank shook his head vehemently. In an ideal world, sure, but we both know that's not how it works. No, we need to keep this secret, at least for now, until we fully understand what we're dealing with. Gary didn't look convinced, but nodded reluctantly. I suppose you're right. It's just... This is so big, Frank. It feels wrong to keep it to ourselves. Frank's expression softened. He sat on the bed next to Gary, placing a hand on her shoulder. I know, but think of the good we can do if we get this right. We could solve world hunger, cure diseases, unlock the secrets of the universe. We just need time to figure it all out. Gary nodded, a small smile forming. You're right. And I have to admit, I'm not ready to give this up yet. The things I've seen, the experiences I've had. I want more. Frank grinned. That's the spirit. We're pioneers, Gary. Explorers of the multiverse. Who knows what we'll discover next? As they talked late into the night, neither of them noticed the faint shimmer in the air near the machine. A barely perceptible ripple in reality, hinting at the forces they had unleashed. The next morning, Frank woke early, his mind already racing with ideas for new experiments. He found Gary in the kitchenette, still in female form, brewing coffee. Sleep well? Frank asked, grabbing a mug. Gary nodded, a thoughtful expression on her face. Yeah, though I had some pretty wild dreams. I think all the dimension hopping is messing with my subconscious. Frank's eyes lit up. Ooh, we should monitor your brain activity during the transitions. There could be some fascinating neural changes happening. Gary laughed, shaking her head. You never stop, do you? Always thinking about the next experiment. Frank shrugged, unabashed. Can you blame me? We're on the cutting edge of, well, everything. The possibilities are endless. As they sipped their coffee, Frank outlined his plans for the day. More targeted jumps to specific alternate Earths, attempts to bring back samples from other dimensions, and experiments with altering the fundamental laws of physics within the chamber. Gary listened, both excited and a little overwhelmed. Frank, don't you think we should slow down a bit? We're messing with forces we barely understand. Frank waved away the concern. That's science, Gary. We push the boundaries, we take risks. How else are we going to make breakthroughs? Before Gary could respond, a loud crack echoed through the room. They both turned to see a jagged line of light hanging in the air near the machine. What the hell? Frank muttered, approaching cautiously. The line widened, revealing a swirling vortex of energy. A figure stepped through, another version of Frank, this one older and battle-worn. "Stop what you're doing!" the other Frank said urgently. "You have no idea what you've set in motion." Frank and Gary stared in shock. The newcomer's clothes were tattered, his face lined with worry and exhaustion. What?" Frank stammered. "I'm you from a possible future," the other Frank explained quickly. "One where our experiments went very, very wrong. We opened doors that should have stayed closed, attracted attention from beings beyond our comprehension." Gary stepped forward, eyes wide. "What kind of beings?" The other Frank's expression darkened. "Trust me, you don't want to know. Interdimensional entities that see our reality as nothing more than a plaything. They used our technology to invade, to reshape entire worlds to their whim." Frank shook his head in denial. "No, that's impossible. Our research is meant to help humanity, not destroy it." "I thought the same thing," the other Frank said sadly. "But intentions mean nothing in the face of cosmic forces we can't control. You need to destroy the machine, bury this research before it's too late." As they argued, the air around them began to shimmer and distort. The walls of the dorm room seemed to ripple and twist, reality itself becoming unstable. "Oh no," the other Frank whispered. "They found me. You need to decide now. Destroy everything, or doom countless worlds to unimaginable horrors." Frank looked at the machine he had poured his heart and soul into, then at Gary, still in her transformed state. The weight of the decision pressed down on him like a physical force. "Frank," Gary said softly, placing a hand on his arm. "I think he's right. We're not ready for this. The risks are too great." Frank closed his eyes, his brilliant mind racing through possibilities and consequences. When he opened them, there was a new resolve in his gaze. "You're right," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "Both of you. We need to end this now." Moving quickly, Frank began shutting down systems and pulling out key components. Gary joined in, using her knowledge from the experiments to target crucial weak points. The other Frank watched anxiously, his form beginning to fade as the timeline shifted. "Hurry!" he urged. "They're coming." As they worked, the distortions in reality grew more pronounced. Strange, otherworldly sounds echoed from just beyond perception. Shadowy tendrils probed at the edges of their vision. With a final, decisive move, Frank initiated an overload in the machine's power core. "We need to get out of here!" he shouted over the rising whine of energy. They ran from the room, the other Frank's form dissipating entirely as they passed. Behind them, a blinding flash and deafening roar signaled the destruction of the machine. Frank and Gary didn't stop running until they were well clear of the building. They watched as emergency vehicles arrived, responding to reports of an explosion in the dorm. "It's over," Frank said quietly, a mix of relief and sorrow in his voice. Gary, still female, looked down at her transformed body. "Not quite. What about me? And your sister's clone?" Frank ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "The effects should fade without the machine to maintain them. You'll revert to your original form within a day or so. As for my sister, I'll have to deal with that somehow." They stood in silence for a long moment, processing the magnitude of what had just happened. "So what now?" Gary asked finally. Frank sighed. "We move on, focus on more conventional fields of study. Maybe someday, when we're older and wiser, we can revisit these ideas. But for now, we leave the doors between worlds firmly shut," Gary finished. As they walked away from the scene, both felt a profound sense of loss, but also relief. They had glimpsed wonders beyond imagination, but also terrors that defied comprehension. The multiverse would have to wait. In the days that followed, life slowly returned to normal. Gary reverted to male form as predicted, the incredible adventures already starting to feel like a distant dream. Frank threw himself into his regular studies, his brilliant mind finding new challenges to occupy it. But sometimes, in quiet moments, they would catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of their eye. A shimmer in the air, a brief distortion of reality, a reminder of the doors they had opened and the ones that remained tantalizingly out of reach. They had tasted the infinite possibilities of the multiverse, and a part of them would always yearn to explore those cosmic frontiers again. But for now, they were content to be ordinary college students, leaving the secrets of reality undisturbed. As weeks turned to months, Frank and Gary settled into a new routine. They threw themselves into their studies, excelling in their classes and impressing their professors. The events surrounding the machine became a closely guarded secret, something they discussed only in hushed tones when they were alone. Frank, true to his word, focused his considerable intellect on more conventional scientific pursuits. He dove into cutting-edge research in quantum computing and artificial intelligence, fields that allowed him to push boundaries without risking the fabric of reality itself. Gary, forever changed by his experiences, found himself drawn to philosophy and theoretical physics. The questions raised by their interdimensional adventures fueled a passion for understanding the nature of consciousness and the fundamental structure of the universe. Though they never spoke of it directly, both felt the loss of the incredible potential they had glimpsed. The ability to reshape one's body at will, to step into entirely different realities, these were experiences that had expanded their minds in ways they were still processing. One evening, as they sat in their dorm room studying, Gary broke the comfortable silence. "Do you ever wonder what might have been?" he asked, his voice tinged with a mixture of curiosity and regret. Frank looked up from his textbook, a haunted look briefly crossing his face. "All the time," he admitted. "The things we could have discovered, the advancements we could have made. It's hard not to think about it." Gary nodded, understanding all too well. "I keep having these dreams," he said softly. "I'm in different bodies, different worlds. Sometimes I'm not even human, and it all feels so real, so vivid." Frank's brow furrowed with concern. "Are they just dreams? Or do you think that there's still some connection to the multiverse?" Gary finished. "I don't know. Part of me hopes there is, but after what we learned..." They fell silent, both lost in thought. The weight of their decision to destroy the machine hung heavily between them. "We did the right thing," Frank said finally, though his tone held a hint of uncertainty. "The risks were too great. We weren't ready." Gary nodded slowly. "I know. It's just hard to let go of that potential, to know what's out there and not be able to explore it." Frank leaned back in his chair, a wistful expression on his face. "Maybe someday," he mused. "When we understand more, when we can control it better, who knows what breakthroughs might come in the future?" As they talked, neither noticed the subtle distortions in the air around them. Reality rippled almost imperceptibly, echoes of alternate timelines brushing against their own. In the weeks that followed, strange occurrences began to multiply. Small at first objects seemingly moving on their own, brief glimpses of impossible scenes out of windows. Frank and Gary did their best to ignore these anomalies, to convince themselves it was just their imaginations playing tricks on them. But as time wore on, the incidents became harder to dismiss. One day, Gary woke to find himself female again, the transformation lasting for several hours before fading. Another time, Frank could have sworn he saw a version of himself walking across campus, older, different, but unmistakably him. They kept these experiences to themselves, fear of the consequences outweighing their scientific curiosity. But the strain of silence began to wear on them both. It all came to a head on a stormy night in late autumn. Wind howled outside their dorm room window as Frank and Gary pored over their notes, preparing for midterm exams. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out. In the darkness, they heard a sound that made their blood run cold, the distinctive hum of the interdimensional machine powering up. "That's impossible," Frank whispered, fumbling for a flashlight. "We destroyed it." As the beam of light cut through the darkness, they saw that their room had changed. Gone were the desks and bookshelves, replaced by sleek, futuristic equipment. In the center stood a gleaming version of their machine, pulsing with energy. Before they could react, a figure stepped out of the shadows. It was another version of Frank, but one twisted by bitterness and obsession. "Did you really think you could just walk away?" the other Frank sneered. "That you could close the doors we opened?" Frank and Gary stood frozen in shock and fear. The other Frank's eyes gleamed with a manic light as he continued. "I've spent years searching the multiverse, finding a reality where you two gave up, where the machine was destroyed, and now I'm here to set things right." "Set things right?" Gary found his voice, anger overcoming his fear. "We saved countless worlds from destruction." The other Frank laughed, a harsh and mirthless sound. "Destruction? No, ascension, evolution. We could have become gods, reshaping reality to our will. Instead, you cowered in fear." As he spoke, the machine behind him pulsed brighter. The air filled with crackling energy, and the walls of the room began to dissolve, revealing glimpses of other dimensions beyond. Frank stepped forward, his mind racing. "Listen to yourself," he pleaded with his alternate self. "This is exactly why we had to stop. The power was corrupting us, blinding us to the consequences." The other Frank's face contorted with rage. "Consequences? I've seen the infinite possibilities of the multiverse. There are no consequences, only choices, and I choose power." He lunged for the machine's controls, but Gary was quicker. In a desperate move, he threw himself at the alternate Frank, tackling him to the ground. The two grappled as Frank rushed to the machine, frantically trying to shut it down. But without his notes, without preparation, he was lost among the unfamiliar controls. "Gary!" he shouted over the rising hum of energy. "I can't stop it." Gary, still wrestling with the alternate Frank, managed to shout back, "Then overload it, like before." Frank hesitated for a split second, then nodded grimly. His fingers flew over the controls, pushing the machine beyond its limits. The alternate Frank, realizing what was happening, let out a howl of anguish. "No! You'll doom us all!" But it was too late. The machine's hum reached a fever pitch, energy arcing wildly around the room. Frank grabbed Gary, pulling him away from their twisted doppelganger. "Brace yourself!" Frank yelled as reality itself seemed to tear apart around them. There was a blinding flash, a sensation of falling through infinite space. And then, darkness. When Frank opened his eyes, he found himself lying on the floor of their ordinary dorm room. Gary was beside him, groaning as he sat up. Did that really happen?" Gary asked, his voice shaky. Frank looked around, seeing no sign of the machine or their alternate selves. "I think so," he said slowly. "But I think we've set things right. For good this time." As they helped each other to their feet, both felt a profound sense of finality. The doors to the multiverse were closed, the temptation of infinite power put to rest. In the days and weeks that followed, life truly did return to normal. No more strange occurrences, no more glimpses of other realities. Frank and Gary threw themselves into their studies with renewed focus, determined to make a difference in this world, their world. But sometimes, in quiet moments, they would share a look of understanding. They had seen wonders and horrors beyond imagination, had grappled with the very nature of reality itself. That experience had changed them, had shown them the true value of the world they called home. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out my other socials if you want more wonderful content, early access, behind the scenes, and more. All links down below.